welcome to Griffonomics. Imagine a frontline medic in, a desert combat zone.
Right, a highly volatile environment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A soldier has suffered severe thermal burns. And, the clock is ticking. There are no medical-grade refrigerators out there.
No sterile operating rooms either.
Yeah, there's just no time to wait. Now, I want you to imagine that medic reaching into a hot canvas backpack for a specialized powder. And this powder is actually derived from pineapple stems.
Which is wild to think about.
It really is. It's an enzymatic formulation that can, chemically perform precision surgery on dead tissue in just a matter of minutes.
And that scenario is exactly what we are unpacking today for you.
We are bringing you into the room for a granular strategic report, really an investment roadmap for a company attempting to make that exact scenario a reality. The company is MediWound, trading under the ticker MDWD.
Right, and we're examining their transition. They're moving from a late-stage R&D biotech firm into what a lot of financial models are now calling a high-margin commercial powerhouse.
And we are going to be looking at this through the de-risked compounder framework.
Which, honestly, is an essential framework to apply here because, the biotech sector is historically anything but de-risked.
Oh, absolutely. Usually it's a minefield.
Exactly. Normally, if you are looking at a clinical stage biotech, you are looking at staggering cash burn rates and binary trial results where just a single failure essentially bankrupts the company.
Yeah, you lose everything on one bad day of data.
Right. But what we're looking at today is a company trying to engineer a structural, government-backed financial floor, all while simultaneously keeping their commercial ceiling completely wide open.
And to figure out if they can actually pull this off, we have a massive stack of intelligence to unpack for you in this deep dive. We've got their March 2026 corporate decks, the latest SEC Form 20F filings.
It's dense stuff.
Yeah, really dense. Plus some incredibly detailed analyst notes and the actual transcripts from their recent earnings calls. We're leaving no stone unturned to see if the math actually matches the ambition here.
So, to set the foundation for you, we first have to understand the biological mechanism driving all of this. Because the underlying technology relies on specialized proteolytic enzymes extracted from the stems of pineapples.
Wait, really? Pineapple stems? That feels like such a counterintuitive source for a modern biologic drug.
I know it is, but these specific enzymes, they possess this remarkable biological property. They're exceptionally effective at repairing damaged tissue.
How does it actually work, though?
Well, they selectively dissolve dead or non-viable tissue, which in the medical field is known as Escher, without harming any of the surrounding healthy tissue.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it acts as this biological precision tool. The science is very much established. But the real story today, the thing you need to care about, isn't just the biology.
Right. We are here for the economics.
Exactly. The story we are analyzing for you is the financial architecture. It's the massive operational leverage waiting to be unlocked if MediWound actually executes their 2026 milestones.
Okay, so before we even look at the high-growth pipeline, we need to understand the financial bedrock making this entire commercial transition possible.
Because you can't scale without cash flow.
Precisely. If you are evaluating a company's ability to scale, you need to know where their baseline cash is coming from. And for MediWound, that bedrock is the BARDA contract.
Right, BARDA. That's the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority.
Which is a very long acronym.
It is. They operate under the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And their whole focus is on emergency medical countermeasures. And they have fundamentally altered the financial trajectory of this company.
Because on April 1st, 2026, a massive 10-year contract officially went into effect. And we're talking about a value of up to $197 million.
That's a huge number. Now, technically, the contract was awarded to Vericel.
Right, and Vericel is MediWound's exclusive North American distributor for their severe burn care drug, which is called NexoBrid.
But the economics of that deal flow back heavily to MediWound.
So how is that initial $197 million actually structured? Because, the government isn't just writing them a single lump sum check for $200 million.
Oh, far from it. The contract actually initiates with a base period of $35 million. And the immediate catalyst within that base period is an allocation of about $10 million over the next 12 months.
Okay, so what is that $10 million doing?
That specific $10 million is designated for the initial procurement of NexoBrid, and it's going to be placed directly into the U.S. Strategic National Stockpile.
Okay, that makes sense.
But the most critical component here for investors isn't just the purchase order itself. It's that this contract funds the establishment of a vendor-managed inventory system, or VMI.
So if you're listening to this and looking at your portfolio, you're probably wondering why you should care about a pharmaceutical company's warehouse logistics.
Right, it sounds a bit dry.
It does. But here is why VMI completely changes the math for you as an investor. Okay, let's unpack this. It's like landing a massive anchor tenant in a brand new mall. But the tenant also agrees to pay for the building's security and maintenance. It completely changes your cash flow, right?
That is a perfect way to look at it. If we connect this to the bigger picture under normal circumstances, if a biotech wants to maintain a massive inventory of a biological product in the U.S., they're absorbing all the overhead.
They're paying for everything.
Exactly. They pay for the specialized warehouses, the commercial-grade temperature controls, the logistics personnel, and, the constant rotation of expiring products. It is an absolute anchor on capital.
But under this VMI model, the U.S. government is actively subsidizing those heavy commercial warehousing and logistics costs.
Right. The government is footing that bill. This shifts the entire strategic deployment of the company's capital.
Because MediWound and Vericel no longer have to burn their own cash on emergency stockpile management.
Exactly. So they can redirect that capital entirely toward high-margin activities, specifically penetrating specialized burn centers and civilian hospital networks. It essentially establishes a federally backed, risk-free revenue floor.
So the U.S. government is essentially paying them to hold the product that the government just bought. That is amazing. And it provides incredible visibility for their 2026 revenue guidance, which they have pegged at $24 to $26 million.
It does. But knowing that the government wants to buy your product is really only half the battle here.
Right, because you have to actually make the stuff.
Exactly. The immediate operational question becomes, can MediWound actually manufacture enough of this highly specialized biologic to satisfy the U.S. stockpile while simultaneously meeting global hospital demand?
And historically, that answer was a flat no.
Yes, historically, no.
Yeah.
The global demand for NexoBrid has actively outpaced their manufacturing capabilities. They literally could not produce enough of it to satisfy the market.
Which brings us to the new factory. This newly commissioned manufacturing facility in Yavdi, Israel. This is basically the linchpin of their physical supply chain right now.
It absolutely is. They've poured significant capital into this Yavni facility, and it provides a massive 6x capacity jump.
6 times their previous commercial output. That's huge.
It is. And the financial target tied to the scale-up is incredibly aggressive. Analysts modeled that if they can fully utilize this new 6x capacity, it has the potential to push MediWound's gross margins to 65%.
Wow, 65%.
Yeah. And, in the biotech manufacturing sector, a 65% gross margin is kind of the magic threshold. That is the point where a company transitions from just keeping the lights on to generating serious compounding cash flow that can be reinvested into clinical trials without diluting the shareholders.
Okay, wait, let me stop you there. Here's where it gets really interesting, but also a bit terrifying.
Okay, let's hear it.
We are treating this 6x capacity like it's a done deal just because the physical building is standing. But they are banking their 2026 revenue guidance of $24 to $26 million on multi-agency FDA and EMA approvals by late 2026. Isn't a single facility in a geopolitical conflict zone a massive vulnerability?
Oh, it is a massive vulnerability, and your skepticism is exactly how an investor should look at this.
Thank you. Because it feels precarious.
It is. Even if you put the macroeconomic and geopolitical location aside for a second, you have to look at the clinical forensics of scaling sterile biologics. This isn't a factory stamping out plastic widgets.
Right. It's organic material.
Exactly. You are dealing with incredibly complex protein extraction, multi-stage purification, and stabilization processes.
The regulatory inspections required to validate a facility like that must be brutal.
Oh, they are unforgiving. The FDA and the EMA require intense validation runs. During these inspections, one microscopic deviation in the cleanroom environment, just one single finding of microbial contamination doesn't just cause a minor operational hiccup.
What happened?
It shuts the entire plant down for months for remediation. It completely derails that 65% margin expansion story and chokes off their commercial supply line to the U.S. It is a high-wire act until that final FDA approval letter is actually in hand.
Okay, so let's assume for a second they managed to cross that tightrope. They secure the FDA approvals. The Yavin facility solves the sheer volume problem for civilian hospitals.
Right. The volume is handled.
But as we comb through these intelligence reports, there's a distinct logistical wall preventing NexoBrid from reaching its ultimate market scale. And that wall is the cold chain.
Yes, the cold chain. That is the strict requirement that a biological drug must be kept refrigerated at all times to remain chemically stable.
And if it gets warm?
If a biologic like NexoBrid gets warm, the proteins denature, they degrade, and the drug basically becomes useless.
Which is fine for a modern civilian hospital in Boston or London, right? I mean, they have endless rows of medical-grade refrigerators.
Exactly. It's highly manageable there. But for an emergency response unit.
Or military deployment.
But
it's an absolute non-starter. You cannot drag a medical refrigerator onto a battlefield or into a disaster zone. And this is where the total addressable market, or TAM, gets really fascinating.
It really does.
Because MediWound recently secured $18.2 million in non-dilutive funding from the Department of War and also from the Medical Technology Enterprise Consortium, or MTEC. So what exactly is the pharmacological goal of that funding?
So the specific mandate of that $18.2 million is to develop a next-generation, room-temperature stable formulation of NexoBrid.
Room temperature, that changes everything.
It does. This involves advanced lyophilization techniques,
Right.
which is essentially freeze-drying the enzymes with highly specialized stabilizers so they can sit in a warm environment without degrading.
And the urgency for this isn't just theoretical. We have real-world data driving this push. But I guess the question is, how effective is a biologic like this actually going to be in a chaotic combat scenario?
Well, according to recently published data from the Israel Defense Forces, and they analyzed thousands of combat casualties, the current formulation of NexoBrid is clinically applicable in 71% of war-related injuries.
71%.
Wow.
That completely changes the triage timeline.
It's a staggering number.
So what does this all mean for the actual market size? Are we talking about a complete paradigm shift from a niche hospital drug to standard issue military gear?
Absolutely. By eliminating the need for refrigeration, you remove the physical boundaries of where the medicine can actually be applied. The TAM expands exponentially.
It's no longer just for burn centers.
Right. It transforms NexoBrid from a niche burn center specialty item into a highly deployable frontline medical countermeasure. A medic can literally carry it in a backpack in a desert environment, apply it directly at the point of injury, and drastically reduce the time it takes to remove necrotic tissue and prepare a wound for survival.
It creates an entirely new paradigm for battlefield trauma and global mass casualty response.
It does. It's a game changer.
But, relying on government stockpiles and military contracts ultimately capture growth. If MediWound wants to justify these compounder financial models and hit those massive valuations, they have to prove this technology works in the civilian commercial market.
Which means taking on the massive U.S. chronic wound space.
Right. A $2.5 billion market.
Exactly. And that imperative brings us to SRX.
Yeah.
This is their investigational next-generation therapy.
Okay, so how is SRX different from NexoBrid?
Well, it leverages the same underlying enzymatic substance as NexoBrid, but it is formulated specifically for daily topical application on chronic, hard-to-heal wounds. We are talking about venous leg ulcers and diabetic foot ulcers.
Which are a massive burden on the healthcare system.
A huge burden. The competitive landscape here is heavily entrenched, though. The legacy standard of care, the drug almost everyone currently uses, is Smith & Nephew's Santal.
And Santal pulls in about $372 million in annual revenue, right?
That's right. But when you look at the clinical data, Santal is notoriously slow.
Why does it take so long to work?
Because of its biological mechanism, Santal relies on a single target of action, which is collagenase. It is designed only to break down collagen.
Okay, wait. So if dead tissue in a chronic wound isn't just made of collagen, but also elastin, fibrin, and a whole mess of other proteins, using Santal sounds like using a rusted spoon to dig a trench, while SRX is a precision laser.
That is the perfect way to visualize it. You're basically trying to disassemble a brick wall by only dissolving the mortar with Santal. You're leaving all the bricks and debris in the way.
While SRX attacks the whole wall.
Exactly. SRX uses a multi-target enzyme mix. It actively breaks down all of those structural proteins simultaneously.
This is just much faster.
Faster, yes, but beyond just dissolving the dead tissue, it actively triggers molecular healing pathways. It significantly reduces bacterial biofilm.
And biofilm is essentially a slimy protective shield that bacteria build over a wound to resist antibiotics, right?
Spot on. It breaks that down, and it promotes healthy granulation tissue. Granulation tissue is that new pink vascular tissue that forms the absolute foundation of a healing wound.
And the data reflects that mechanism. In Phase 2 head-to-head trials, SRX achieved complete debridement in a median of just 9 days.
9 days is incredibly fast.
Yeah, at a 63% success rate within a 2-week window. And in that exact same 2-week clinical window, Santal achieved a 0% complete debridement rate, 0%.
Which perfectly explains the strategy behind the pivotal Phase 3 value trial for Escherichs. The trial currently has a target of 216 patients with venous leg ulcers.
But if the Phase 2 data is already this dominant, why is the value trial so heavily focused on speed? The trial rules mandate a primary assessment after just up to 8 applications across a 2-week window. Why not look at it over 2 months?
What's fascinating here is that in the chronic wound market, speed is the ultimate currency. A prolonged treatment timeline means endless nurse visits, an exponentially higher risk of severe infection, and massive costs to payers and hospital networks.
So they have to prove it's faster to get the hospitals on board.
Right. The value trial is explicitly designed with co-primary endpoints. They have to prove the incidence of complete debridement and the facilitation of wound closure over that highly condensed 2-week window.
And if they hit that mark,
if MediWound proves statistical superiority in speed, meaning measuring healing in days rather than weeks, they don't just get FDA approval. They get the precise economic metric required to justify premium pricing and aggressively capture market share from Santal.
and that's exactly how the analyst models are projecting $831 million in peak sales for Escherichs. If you prove you can do in 9 days what takes the legacy competitor 6 weeks, it forces a complete reassessment of the standard of care by payers and hospital systems alike.
It completely shifts the economics of chronic wound care.
But, and this is big but, getting to that $831 million peak relies on the Phase 3 value trial executing flawlessly. And as anyone who follows the biotech space knows, clinical trials rarely go perfectly.
Rarely is an understatement.
True. So we have to do a clinical risk forensic on this trial design and examine the market skepticism.
Right. So the primary risk factor here lies in the trial's adaptive design. The value trial includes a predefined interim sample size assessment scheduled for late 2026.
What triggers that assessment?
This assessment is triggered the moment 65% of the enrolled patients complete their 12-week wound management period.
So an independent monitoring board steps in, looks at the early blinded data, and asks one specific question: is this trial statistically powered to definitively prove our endpoints?
Precisely. They are looking to ensure the data signal is strong enough. And if the early data isn't overwhelmingly dominant, if the trial is deemed underpowered, MediWound faces what analysts call the expansion fallout risk.
Which means they need more people.
Yes. The trial rules dictate they would have to expand enrollment by roughly 100 additional patients to achieve statistical significance.
What does a 100-patient expansion actually cost a company in terms of operational runway? Because enrolling patients with specific venous leg ulcers isn't something you do overnight.
It is an incredibly heavy lift. Analysts estimate that a 100-patient expansion would cause a minimum 6-month delay in the final data readout.
Ouch.
Yeah, pushing the critical data deeply into 2027. Furthermore, it would add an estimated $10 million in unbudgeted clinical costs. That scenario entirely disrupts their targeted 2028 commercial launch timeline for Escherichs.
And speaking of disrupted timelines and vulnerabilities, we have to talk about the government dependency risks.
Right, the political side of things.
Yeah, because as much as we praise the BARDA contract as a brilliant de-risked floor, let's look at the reality of what actually happened at the end of 2025. MediWound's Q4 2025 revenue dropped sharply to $1.9 million.
Which was a significant miss.
Huge miss. In the exact same quarter the prior year, they did $5.8 million. Management explicitly cited the U.S. government shutdown as the primary driver. It delayed federal budget approvals and paused the initiation of new contractual agreements.
It did.
This raises a huge red flag for me. We're calling this a de-risked compounder, but they literally missed their Q4 2025 revenue because politicians in Washington couldn't pass a budget. Aren't we just trading clinical risk for political risk?
This raises an important question, and it's a highly critical distinction to make when evaluating the company's near-term cash flow. You are absolutely right that short-term revenue recognized from development services is highly vulnerable to the whims of Capitol Hill.
Right, the funding for the next-gen military formulations.
Exactly. A government shutdown literally pauses those checks. However, we have to separate that R&D service revenue from the commercial vendor-managed inventory contract that went into effect in April 2026.
Okay, so the VMI contract, that baseline bedrock we talked about, is insulated from the political theater.
It insulates the core stockpile procurement to a significant degree because those funds are typically legally committed over the base period of the contract. However, your critique is absolutely valid when we zoom out and look at the broader corporate guidance.
Right, the 2028 numbers.
Yes. MediWound's 2028 revenue guidance targets $50 million to $55 million. That number is highly vulnerable. It is completely sensitive to Asharex hitting its exact approval timelines without any of those trial expansion delays we just analyzed.
So if Washington delays funding for the next-gen pipeline and the value trial hits a 6-month expansion delay, that 2028 guidance falls apart entirely.
It crumbles, yes.
Which brings us to our final verdict on the de-risk compounder thesis. We have weighed the ironclad government floor against the highly fragile clinical and regulatory execution timelines.
It's a delicate balance.
It is. The company is currently guiding for a massive 45% revenue compound annual growth rate, or CAGR, through 2028. Based on the intelligence stack we've just unpacked, is that 45% growth rate too conservative or too optimistic?
The verdict is completely bifurcated. It is wildly conservative if and only if Asharex hits the 9-day debridement endpoint and captures even a fraction of its $831 million peak sales potential.
If they do that, it's a home run.
Exactly. If they prove that kind of clinical superiority, the market adoption in the chronic wound space could easily outpace a 45% CAGR. However, that entire projection is incredibly precarious if the Yavin facility fails its FDA inspections. Or, if the value trial requires that costly 100-patient expansion.
It is the classic biotech high-wire act. They've built a much stronger financial safety net than their peers.
Yeah.
But they're still walking a very high wire.
They absolutely are. And there is one final variable to leave you with.
Okay, what's that?
It's something that rarely gets headline attention, but it is buried deep in the supply chain risk factors. The entire proprietary enzymatic platform, whether it's NexoBrid, Asharex, or the room temperature military formulation, relies on an intermediate drug substance called bromelain, SP.
The raw pineapple extract we mentioned at the start.
Exactly. And MediWound sources this incredibly critical raw material from a single supplier located in Taiwan.
Wait, a single supplier? Just one?
Just one. Think about the strategic implications of that for a moment. If the next generation NexoBrid successfully expands to a global mass casualty and battlefield footprint, and if Asharex successfully disrupts the $2.5 billion chronic wound market,
the demand is going to be astronomical.
The global demand for this specific enzyme will be unprecedented. So the question investors have to ask is, can a single agricultural supply chain in Taiwan keep up with the theoretical 6x manufacturing capacity of the new Israeli plant?
That is a massive bottleneck risk.
It is. When you layer the geopolitical complexities of both regions on top of an agricultural supply chain, it creates a structural fragility that could bottleneck the entire de-risked compounder thesis.
A microscopic deviation in a clean room, a political standoff in Washington, or an agricultural bottleneck in Taiwan. The commercial ceiling for this enzymatic technology is incredibly high, but building the floor still requires flawless execution, risk defined, portfolio protected.